Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, and then we should be able to start quickly. Just bear with us for a couple of minutes. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Just waiting one more minute so more people can join before we start. So bear with us, please. Okay. I think we can start now. We've got a packed webinar today for everyone, and we will be recording just like last week. So our lovely comms team will be publishing the webinars as soon as possible. They've told us that the first one will go live on our YouTube channel tomorrow, I believe. So do check it out and subscribe so you can receive notifications for these webinars, but also as we publish more videos, because we record a lot of these sessions that we have for other projects and other initiatives that GDI Hub has. So feel free to check out our YouTube channel. I'll ask our comms team to put the link in the chat. So the link is available for you to just click on and proceed. So welcome to our second Disability Inclusion and ICT webinar. My name is Mariam. I'm wearing a cream patterned scarf today, and I identify as a brown woman. We're delighted to host the Disability Inclusion and ICT webinar series as part of the wider project focusing on public engagement for ICT. The project focuses on promoting meaningful participation and leadership by disabled people in ICT education, research, and innovation. The project is led by our academic director, Professor Kathy Holloway, who is joining us later. So do stay until the end of the webinar. And myself, Mariam, and it is funded by Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. So as we mentioned last time, there are 3 webinars in this series, and each focuses on a different aspect of disability inclusion and ICT innovation. There should be a link to our website, our webpage in the chat for anyone interested in learning more about the project. So in today's webinar, as I mentioned, we've got packed. We've got 4 speakers who are from our Inclusive ICT Research Panel. And we will, as usual, follow up that by a Q&A in the last 20 minutes of the webinar today. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Ben Watson, who is the Head of Digital Accessibility at UCL. Ben is a former law librarian and qualified teacher and has a passion for inclusive design that has led him into researching and implementing approaches to inclusive information and technology provision for education, Ben has experience of working with all UK education sectors, primary, secondary, further, and higher education, and many years of experience of working to improve both physical and digital accessibility of educational organizations. Over to you, Ben. Thank you for joining.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for having me, and hi everyone. So the theme of today that we were asked to discuss was breaking down barriers to disability inclusion in information and communication technologies, which I think I'll probably end up just saying ICT from now on, but that's what I'm referring to. So the first kind of question I'd like to tackle, what are some of the barriers to disability inclusion in ICT? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm a white man with brown hair wearing a navy blue jumper. Sorry. So what are some of the barriers to disability inclusion in ICT? I think there's a number of things we need to consider here. I spend a lot of my working life considering the technical accessibility of some of our systems, so the systems that allow information to be moved around, to be stored and shared, and these lovely collaborations and learning opportunities, particularly in the world of higher education. This is where most of the action happens now, quite possibly in as much of a digital kind of arena as it does in a physical arena. So I think we need to really understand what are some of the technical standards through which our information systems are being created, both at a kind of container level. So if you think of a virtual learning environment, which is a place where lots of universities will host their kind of learning content, PowerPoint slides, documents, module handbooks, lecture recordings. You've got the accessibility of the container itself, the system that people use to navigate, to go and find and interact with that content. And then you've got the accessibility of the content itself, so what's the digital accessibility confidence within an organization for everyone creating content to be able to design that content in a way that it anticipates the requirements of people who are going to be using assistive technologies. So how well will those systems and the contents within those systems support the use of people using screen readers? So any visual elements within documents and parts of the system, how well will they be able to be represented non-visually? And our content creators given the advice and guidance they need to be able to accurately provide, for example, alternative text descriptions to bring to life any visual elements. Similarly, with the way that people navigate systems, if somebody perhaps can't use a mouse or a pointing device because of low mobility, or perhaps they are a screen reader user, then do the systems support other means of navigation? Have we tested that the systems will work for people using simple keyboard tapping as a way to interact with a digital interface? So I think we need to make sure that everyone within our organization, including third-party suppliers who are supplying, particularly education and public sector organizations, are delivering systems that support that good practice. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are the kind of international standard for measuring the accessibility of information communication technology. I think primarily we're talking here about kind of web delivered content, but the principles actually are true of pretty much anything that's available digitally that has any kind of human audience or interface. I think the other big barrier to disability inclusion in ICT is more of a sort of a digital inclusion thing, in terms of, do people have access to the technology? Do people have access to the infrastructure that supports that technology? Wi-Fi, good levels of broadband, some of those things. But equally, I think it's about people having access to training and confidence building to know what technology is available to them. So in terms of the way that people use and consume information delivered via information communication technology systems and platforms, I think that's really important as well, that we raise awareness of what the assistive technologies are, how you can get access to them, and how you can confidently apply them to getting the best out of any particular digital experience that you're having. And I think until we get some of those foundational building blocks right, it's very difficult to ensure the wider inclusion in all realms of ICT development, because it's almost a barrier before we even get started. If people with disabilities can't access the systems where that conversation is happening, then we're already playing a horrible game of catch up. There's a fantastic web page that's run by a UK charity called AbilityNet, that's called My Computer, My Way. And it's a really simple idea that it points people at the inbuilt assistive functionality that's available freely on all of the devices that all of us use every day. So if you were a user of an Apple iPhone and you wanted to understand if there's any way that you could perhaps adapt the way that colors are presented when you're viewing material via your iPhone, it will point you at the inbuilt guidance on how you change those settings on your iPhone. So I think being aware that you know, we need to overcome some barriers in order to begin the real work of overcoming the barriers, just in terms of access to information is one of the first things. The second kind of question we were asked to address is, what is the role of accessibility in breaking down these barriers? Well, I've already mentioned this. It's the, you know, if we anticipate the requirements of everyone when we're designing and delivering any kind of experience, you know, physically or digitally, we're removing the barriers before they have a chance to present as barriers. But I think we need to build the confidence of the people who are developing those systems, who may not have disabilities themselves, may not have any kind of lived experience in this space, to be able to confidently identify them and know how to fix them as well, you know, so that they should be given the confidence that this is something they should be doing as part of the natural design process. I saw a really lovely tweet quite recently, and it said this: accessibility isn't more work. You were just cutting corners before and the work was incomplete. So I think accessibility is about designing systems, experiences, interactions that work well by design, out of the box, off the shelf, you know, all those things. At the point of creation, accessibility is built into it. And I think it needs to be seen in the same breath as cybersecurity, data protection. Accessibility is a core compliance, it's a core deliverable of any system or service that we're providing. I always describe the kind of work that I do as the digital equivalent of putting in ramps and lifts to information. I think it's often much clearer to people where physical infrastructure isn't terribly accessible, because you generally, you know, it's obvious there's a ramp or a lift into a building, but the digital equivalent of that isn't always quite so obvious. So I think extra skills and confidence building is really important, particularly in people in key roles in web development, user experience testing. I think that's really, really important that we raise the profile of that. The next question we were asked to address is, what needs to change to bridge the digital skills gap? Well, I think this is a cultural thing. I think we need to raise awareness that everyone has a role to play in improving accessibility and ensuring seamlessness of access to all the systems and services that we all need to interact with in order to contribute to the world of research and kind of global improvement. I think if we can get the message across that everyone benefits when we make things accessible, this isn't just about people with disabilities. This is just about making better things that work well for everyone. Typically, a lot of the interventions that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines would recommend, similar to just make systems easier to use, you know, targets easier to hit when you're using a mouse, less kind of fussy interfaces, better compatibility across, you know, large screens and smaller mobile devices, you know, which is definitely a benefit to everyone. And I think when we were talking about assistive functionality and raising people's awareness of access to those, I think that should be a universal thing. Again, we should let everybody know that systems that are well designed and would support easy manipulation for increased levels of zoom, changing all of the colors to suit individual requirements, or indeed having text read aloud to you. Again, that's a universally beneficial bit of functionality that's worth sharing, as it's a further kind of incentive for suppliers to build that in by design. I think there are those business incentives for suppliers. I think public sector bodies in particular should be better at demanding this from things that we're paying for. And I think that there is global legislation, you know, European, there's certainly legislation in the United Kingdom, and then there's American legislation as well. So I think they're all of which are underpinned by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So I think a consistency of calling out badly inaccessible systems where we see it is really important, and people should be encouraged to advocate for that. I think in terms of a kind of design principle, I was looking at the UK government for its digital output has its own design principles via its design system. And I just want to read to you a paragraph that I found there, which I think kind of encapsulates everything I'm trying to say here. It says, accessible design is good design. Everything we build should be as inclusive, legible, and readable as possible. If we have to sacrifice elegance, so be it. We're building for needs, not audiences. We're designing for the whole country, not just the ones who are using the web. The people who most need our services are often the people who find them hardest to use. Let's think about those people from the start. And I think if we do that, we only do good things. This isn't about creating an accessible version of the thing and then creating the thing. The thing is the accessible version because we built it in at the beginning, and that thing is then just perfect. Go off into the world and reach and inspire as many people as possible without any need for retrospective adaptation. Why should this change happen was one of the final questions. I think ethically, clearly, it's the right thing to do. This is the way that we should all be creating systems where we're looking at the world of research and technological advancement. That is only possible realistically in the best, most valuable, sustainable way when everybody is included. It's a much richer conversation where we've got every perspective is covered. And as I've said, I've been working in the kind of accessibility space for a very long time. And I've never, ever seen an example of something that was made to be more accessible to, for example, somebody with a print disability that didn't just make a better thing. And if you want a good example of that, look no further than the way that Apple designed their products. I'm not a salesman for Apple, but they do put accessibility and inclusivity at the heart of their design, and their products are renowned for being quite intuitive, easy to use, and commercially that's been very, very successful for them. I think I've already mentioned the kind of usability argument here, but I think particularly in the world of research and knowledge sharing, there are competitive advantages, discoverability advantages. If you make stuff that's accessible, that necessarily includes everyone in the entire community, you have a bigger audience of people that you can impact. But equally, documents, resources, content that's been created to be accessible will necessarily be more discoverable. So it will do better in search engine optimization where it's machine readable. And so the things that mean that a screen reader user will be able to use them are exactly the same things that mean that the document and the resource can be more discoverable and therefore have a greater impact. And finally, there is legislation that says we have to do this. So I think that's the landscape in which we're working. And I think we just need some levels of global consistency in this, where we're all asking for the same things. And I think if we can establish those baselines, then suppliers and content creators likewise will know exactly what the expectations are. And accessibility would not be forgotten. I think the worst thing that can happen in any project, any ICT design, is that accessibility and the design of the thing happens separately. And quite often what happens is the thing's designed and goes out into the world. And the first time that somebody actually thinks about accessibility is when someone's telling you that they can't do something, they can't access it, by which point it's already broken. Let's bring the whole kind of design ethos further, shift it left, make sure accessibility is part of that journey. And then only good things happen. There's a little bit more work to do at the initial design stage, but what it means is when you finish and you deliver on an ICT project, everybody's included and the thing is then future-proofed. So I hope I filled the time, Mariam. I'm happy to take any questions or we'll do that at the end. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you for reminding the title of today's webinar as well. In my excitement, I completely forgot to introduce that. Yes, I would like to remind everyone to put your questions in the chat and we will do our best to go through all the questions at the end. I'll quickly introduce our second speaker, our second speaker is Pete Donnelly, who is the founder of Wheelchair Skills College, which envisioned that every wheelchair user should have access to learn essential wheelchair skills. And it believes that filling this current gap is more than a choice or more than a nice to have service, and it is in fact a fundamental human right. Pete, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mariam. And thank you for having me along today to be on the panel. So just starting with a quick visual description. I am a white male with red hair and a beard, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. So following on from what's just been talked about, I'd like to talk to you today more about breaking down barriers around inclusion to ICT, and looking at what those barriers are and accessibility to inclusion, what changes need to happen, and also how that change can happen as well. So starting off with the barriers that exist, it's all about the digital divide. And when we look at that, looking at it in the context of access and usage of ICT. And when we think about access to ICT, I know from personal experience that looking at some of these pieces of specialist equipment, the cost can be most prohibitive barrier. I mean, some of the specialist equipment is far above what the mainstream equipment costs. And you can shop around and find better prices, but we're living in a cost of living crisis and everything adds up, and those essential bits of equipment are costing more. Now, as well as those essential bits of equipment costing more, you've got additional costs of daily living, of living with a disability. And recent research by the charity Scope from earlier this year showed that disabled people face extra costs here in the UK of £975 a month. So potentially limited income, and then you're having to pay these extra costs per month, and then trying to find the costs on top of that to get what could be really essential bits of ICT to be fully included, but incredibly difficult to find the money for that in the first place. And then you've got to think about what the right equipment is, and how do you find out what that equipment is? Where do you go to find out this kind of what's out there and what you can use? And you can go to your local supplier, but then you're relying on their up-to-date knowledge and making sure that they have what you need there. And if you're not confident at using the internet as well, then there's a huge resource there that there's not going to be an option for you to tap into. And then even if you can use the internet, there's so much out there. It's like, where do you know to look, and who are you going to be able to trust with all this information as well? I'm going to come back to touch on a bit of that later on as well. And finally, in terms of access, it's unlikely that one person's going to be having just one piece of equipment, and then you've got to rely on multiple pieces of equipment working together. When you start doing that, researching for lots of different pieces of equipment, then all this time is going to be taken up by going through exactly what I just said. So kind of looking at this equipment, finding out who to trust, trying to find money for it. And these are all additional tasks on top of what you're doing in your day-to-day life. So there's a whole host of access issues that you're going to find there. And going on to usage, once you've got the equipment, you need to make sure that you're able to use it. So digital literacy and knowledge on even basic equipment varies so much across people. If you need specialist hardware, then you need to access specialist training for that, and it's going to be essential for it to be used. Not being able to get that training to be able to use that equipment means you're not going to have the skills and confidence to use it, and then the equipment essentially becomes an expensive ornament at home, and it's not benefiting anyone. There are certain things in the systems themselves, like complicated user interfaces, jargon-filled contents, or websites that have poor navigation that aren't accessible for a lot of people. And as we just spoke about, kind of you make it accessible for one person, and you're going to make it accessible for your entire audience. And our situation is always changing as well. So we need to be ready to use a new piece of technology. We need to know about the latest app. We need to know how to use that and how we can use that for our particular circumstances. So a couple of other things around the divide as well. So we're looking at stigma and discrimination. There are things that are so built in to our society, prejudice and stereotypes, lack of awareness around capabilities of disabled people that can create barriers to disabled participation. So then thinking about what the role of accessibility is in inclusion. And so equal participation, is one that kind of springs to mind for me. So making sure that accessibility for disabled people in all aspects of life, so whether it is kind of education, employment, public services, kind of your socializing as well, being able to access how you're going to get around transport wise, what venues are like before you get there, and making sure that somewhere is going to be, well, for me, it's going to be wheelchair accessibility. Does it have a level entrance? Does it have wheelchair accessible toilets in the venue? All these things are things I need to know before I get to a space. Sorry if you're going to hear the doorbell in the background. So when environments and tools are accessible, then it engages everyone within the community rather than just individuals. Social integration is a big part of that as well. So you're making all these spaces accessible, then disabled people become part of society rather than being hidden away, feeling unsure, unconfident in terms of accessing these spaces. And by giving people information and access to those services online as well, you make these day-to-day things much easier. As I said, you kind of giving people the information to get around by public transport, you're giving people information to venues, giving people information to what support services are available in the local area. So you're maintaining that health and well-being for the individual as well. One thing that I see a lot of around access to ICT as well, and particularly around social media for this, is that there's so many platforms that you can use to have your voice heard. So whether we're thinking of signing petitions, one that was successful this week in the UK was around disabled people opposing the closure of ticket offices at train stations, and that was successful to stop them closing. And it was such a massive coalition of disabled voices coming together. I think it was about 700,000 people that signed that petition in the end. And that stopped a decision to close those ticket offices, which was going to make access to public transport much more difficult for a lot of people. And as well as this, you've got so many social platforms where you can share your own personal experiences. So I used to manage a program called Changemakers, which was a citizen reporting program. The idea being when you're out and about in your daily life, you take pictures or videos of things that affect you, and then you're able to share those on social media, raise awareness of those issues, and turn it into a campaign as well. As I've just talked about, those campaigns can gather a lot of momentum very quickly. So when we think about what needs to change to bridge the digital skills gap, we need to, first of all, look at the digital literacy of everyone, and it needs to be integrated within the schools and colleges, making sure that students have access to these in a very inclusive way, and making sure that they are learning about it on a constant basis, making sure that they have the skills post-education to be able to go out there and continue that learning. The digital infrastructure, making sure that there are affordable and reliable internet throughout all the towns, cities, making sure people can access them when they're out through Wi-Fi hotspots. When they're at home, they have access to affordable home internet at home, making sure that they can do all the things that we've talked about. So whether it is education, whether it's employment, whatever those online services are, they should have access to them at home as well. A really important part, and going back to that social media side of things, is the recognition of informal learning. So we may go to school, college, university for learning, but there's a lot that can be learned online as well. You can do it through a more formal route and education systems online, but there's a lot that can be learned, as mentioned, sharing your personal stories as a disabled person online. People can learn from that as well. I know that when I have something that I'm looking for, then these platforms are the first place I go. So quick example is that when I got an electric attachment for my scooter and I was changing the tire for that on the first time, because it has the motor in the wheel. It's got a split rim tire, and that's something I've never done before. So I went on YouTube, I looked on there to find out how to change a split rim tire, and it's a couple of simple tools that I already have access to that I used, Allen key, a screwdriver. I was able to change it myself. I mean, the alternative for that would have been taking it to an official supplier, maybe having to pay more money. So again, we look at kind of cost saving that access to these online services bring. And how should this change happen? Well, I think it's really key that it is led by the government. It needs to make sure that there is investment in this. It talks about affordable and accessible IT. We need to make it part of the education, and the government has that leadership role to address those digital skills gap and bring in policies that that do affect the education, and making sure that those support services are in place. A big part of this is education reform. So as I mentioned before, it needs to be embedded within our school systems, making sure that people are continuously learning about the latest ICT, making sure they have access to it, making sure it is a very inclusive process, making sure that we have the teaching staff in place who are confident in teaching all of these skills, making sure that they are up to date on the latest tech as well. And collaboration is a key part here as well. So we're looking at government bringing in these policies, but we need to make sure that the partnerships are in place between governments, local governments, private sector, not-for-profit organizations, to make sure everyone's bringing their knowledge together and able to promote access to these really critical pieces of equipment and knowledge around ICT. And then just quickly finishing up, I think it's really important around public awareness, making sure that we do have awareness campaigns to raise the profile of the inclusion of ICT and the idea that this is promoting lifelong learning, to make sure that people are aware of resources available to them. And also just around that social media elements, making sure that there are role models that are very visible. It's incredibly important to have that representation available to people, and social media is a great way to do that, but also kind of social media to normalize these different uses of ICT, and making sure that people have access to the role models that look like them, sound like them, and they're able to learn from these people around differences that can be made to their life as well. So I realise I think I'm just getting to the end of the time now, so I'll wrap up on that.
Great. Thank you, Pete. And definitely some great points and insights to consider when thinking about disability inclusion, not in ICT education, but also in general infrastructure and different players within that. So thank you for that. And I would quickly introduce our third speaker, Sarah Rocha, I think, if I'm not mispronouncing it, who is a data manager at University of Cambridge. Sarah is a disability advocate, a disability and disabled advocate, and co-founder of the Portuguese Association of Autistic People and vice president of the European Council of Autistic People. She's also the vice chair of the European Disability Forum Women's Committee. Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm Sarah Rocha. I'm a white woman with brown hair, blue glasses, and a green jumper. So I'm going to continue to talk about the barriers. And I'd like to start by talking about 3 different ways that people with disability can be involved in research. And that can be by being consulted, by being involved, actively involved, and by being leaders. And what's happening at the moment within research, and especially ICT research, is that we are normally consulted. which means it's normally done at a very superficial level. It's normally at the beginning or end of the project or product. It's not throughout the whole implementation, which means that we don't have a possibility of active change. But what we really want is for disabled people to be able to be leaders in projects and in development, which means that we can do active change from beginning. And when I say beginning, not only when a product is developed, but from the idea beginning. So you really need to be able to be a part of production and development of both projects and products from start to finish, and that unfortunately is not happening at the moment. One of the reasons is what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which is lived experiences are normally not seen as expertise, but we are normally just involved as a consulting. We are not actively involved in the project to actually change it and improve it for us. Even for consultation, if this is being developed with non-accessible tools, and this was already talked about today, but this will not make us able to participate. So I recently used a survey that is being developed to include sign language, different types of accessibility, screen readers, etc., which is a very complete form of accessible survey. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that we don't have any survey that has all of these features to provide accessibility for people that speak through sign language, that prefer different types of color in the screens, which sometimes even with epilepsy can cause severe problems if the background of the pages are a specific color. So it really it's revolutionary when you see a survey even. So even the data gathering is not designed for us, and it's not including us. So obviously we're not going to have a possibility to be a part of change if from start to finish we are not being consulted. Another thing is people with disabilities need to be not only included in project, as I said, from the beginning to the end of the development cycle, but need to be able to lead the accessibility development, which normally is not done in research, but can be achieved through the inclusion of disabled experts or researchers. Because sometimes when you speak about disabled people being involved, we only speak as a consultants or as lived experience experts, but in reality, we do have a lot of disabled researchers that can be hired for universities to develop research within product development and projects to make it more accessible. And this is incredibly important because, again, it's an empowerment situation, because we only see disabled people as consultants at best. We need to see them as leaders, industry leaders, which is exactly what we are. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that the lived experiences are not seen normally as an expertise. So normally that's seen as just a consulting part, as I said. So it's normally very specific, very superficial. In reality, when we talk about lived experiences or having that expertise, it's not just our personal knowledge. Obviously, there is our personal knowledge, but a lot of us have backgrounds in accessibility, product development, data management, economics, and many others. So when we're talking about lived experiences, a lot of has a lot of background, have expertise in different areas that can truly change how a product is developed. And having lived experience is also not only our personal knowledge, because many of us, and I speak for myself, are deeply involved with our communities. So it gives us a very deep insights into the different needs, knowledge, and information to advise these changes in a broader level. Of course, no one can speak for their whole community, as we know, but we can certainly be active learners with our own community, which is normally what happens with lived experience experts. And this is very important because we need to start seeing lived experience as expertise. We need to start paying disabled people to participate in projects, in product development. Because a lot of work also that are being done within ICT is sometimes volunteer. So it is asked to do volunteer. Obviously, disabled people might not have as a lot of time to volunteer. And it's important for us to be experts and participate actively as employment and have a career. So what is the role of accessibility breaking down these barriers? If you're not getting consultant and if you're not being involved, how can we break this down? And accessibility is the first step to access the space to make changes. So this is a little bit what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because we need accessible forms of participation to be able to be a part and have the space to do that. So accessibility is not only essential, but disability inclusion cannot happen without it. And this is especially important for people with learning disabilities, with higher support needs that are normally not at all included into research and projects developments, even in products and projects that are designed for them. And this needs to change to include every type of disability, every type of support need. So there is a need for further regulations and legal requirements that actually mandate accessibility because this is not being done. So people with disability need to be involved from idea formation to prototype development to design to commercialization. But most importantly, disabled people need to be involved not only in products that are designed for disabled people, but any product that is developed at all. Currently, most products are not contemplating our needs from scratch and end up having to make adjustments once they need to fill the legal requirements, which is definitely not enough. It is going to be a substandard product. And end up not being effective or accessible. So we are putting money into accessibility that is not going to actually have any impact in making the spaces more accessible. And this needs to be done from scratch. And we need to ensure that companies, universities, every organization that are developing new technologies and new ICT and new assistive devices needs to ensure that disabled people are involved, but not only when it's for disabled people. It needs to be in any type of product because we are going to need to use it. Then what I was going to say, sorry. So disability inclusion cannot be a tick box exercise, basically. We need to ensure that we are included as a part of the whole project, not just when people realize that actually this is not very accessible and it's not fitting the legal requirements. So let's just try to alter it enough to pass. It needs to be from scratch. It needs to be from idea. How should this change happen? Above all, we need to be taken serious as experts and research in our own right. We need to be seen as leaders of our own industry. Our capacity needs to be recognized, and the stigma and the idea that we are not capable or we will produce substandard work needs to be trashed, because it's definitely not true. And I think the amount of disabled leaders that are in most countries can show you otherwise. So again, we need to evolve from idea to idea, the idea to commercialization of products that our community will be using. We also need to involve in any type of product that is going to be used by society in general, because we can't just have disabled products for disabled people. We need products for everyone that everyone can use. Every system needs to be contemplating accessibility, not only the ones that are designed for us. So ICT should not be focused on the next shiny new tech thing, which normally it's what happened, but also how they can induce industry knowledge with the disabled people to problem solve based on our needs and priorities, and not just chase the new AI or new problem solve that's going to fix everything for disabled people. This actually needs to be, even the priorities needs to be checked first with disabled people and then produce. And finally, I just want to share with you the cut curve effect. The cut curve effect is led to the cuts in the curves for people in wheelchairs, but it does help with anyone with bags, with baby prams, with with anything that it will have wheels, really. And this is important because this is what happens with accessibility. So disability accessibility will be good for carers, people with mental health difficulties, people who are elderly or children, people in burnout. So it will help everyone, some types of accessibility, even the being able to change the background on a web page. It can help people that are just tired and their eyes are hurting, so they prefer to have the night page, So this will help everyone, not just disabled people. And just the last to close it, more than nothing about us, without us, we need to pass to nothing about us, period. So we really need to start not just producing disabled products for disabled people. We need to start producing products that contemplate disabled people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was indeed great to hear. I think disability inclusion, one of the biggest challenges is around lived experience and the value of lived experience. Yeah, definitely great to hear that. I would remind everyone to add your questions to Q&A. I'm sorry we are running out of time, but we'll do our best to answer the question as quickly as possible. Also, you can reach out to the panelists directly through our website, or you can reach out to me and I can direct you to one of the panelists. So our final speaker for the day is Paul Mugambi, who's joining us from Kenya. Paul is an accessibility evangelist and innovator. He is passionate about accessibility and digital space, and he's a blind innovator, I'm sorry. He's a public policy expert and has contributed to public policy in Kenya and Australia towards the inclusion of issues of persons with disabilities related to housing, transportation, and language. He's also a radio presenter and founder of the Disability Sausage Media YouTube channel, so feel free to check it out. Paul, over to you. Paul, you're still muted. I can unmute. Can try.
Still muted, Paul. What's the shortcut key for mute in this platform? It's Shift Command A. That's better.
You can hear me now?
There, Paul. Yes, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm an African person wearing a white shirt and with some sunglasses, short hair. Thank you for the opportunity, and also fellow panelists for the previous presentations. To begin with, I would like to discuss issues around breaking the barriers on ICT and what changes can be done, sharing the experience of being a public policy scholar and also an innovator. This one doesn't come very easily because for me, as a person with a disability. I greatly know that we face a lot of barriers, ranging from attitudinal barriers, issues around discrimination, issues around stereotypes. And then when you talk about issues about environmental barriers, issues around institutional barriers, and the last one about issues around financial barrier, which I can call it as one of the things which really affects us as persons with disability. And as we try to look on how we can really address this thing, or how we can be able to break the barriers, we first of all have to understand the barriers which we experience, so that at the end of the day, we can be able to bring the enablers in place, which can assist us in terms of ensuring that we really are able to make the change in terms of ICT. And as we know, in the most of the time that in the area around persons with disabilities, especially in the global south, we are the most affected in terms of access to ICT or even issues around technology. And this one really makes us not to be able to access all this information, which is currently being, as you know, the world is moving towards that direction. Breaking the barriers on ICT can really be a daunting task. And especially when you know that resources are not geared towards that. And when you know that lots of awareness has not been done in terms of even we as persons with disabilities in our own existence. When you look at basically when you talk about attitudinal barrier, there are issues around ableism, issues around attitudes. How can we really enable the community or the society, first of all, to understand that persons with abilities are individuals first as persons, human beings, and we don't underestimate their capacities? Because that's the real fact whereby we find that the largest barrier or the attitudinal barrier really is the one which really impedes or prevents persons' abilities from actually being involved in terms of participation or even in terms of ICT access. And from my own experience as an innovator, I know that when I first of all even began issues around discussing issues around my innovation, people were surprised. They didn't expect that a blind person like me can come up with a sort of an idea which can really enable or support or bring change in terms of persons with disabilities. When you talk about the environmental barrier, we know it's all about issues around how our site is built in terms of ICT or in terms of how people really can be able to reach to a distance or access to a particular place. And when you find this barrier, it really needs to be broken, and ICT can really contribute in terms of making those changes, whether it is in terms of bringing issues of access or bringing issues around distance, which can really enable persons with disabilities towards accessing ICT. Thirdly, when we talk about maybe communication barrier, which is also a major issue in terms of even ICT, how we can relate information, how we can be able to communicate, how can technology enable persons' abilities towards accessing different technologies or even assistive devices. Because this is a major area of concern once you talk about issues of persons who have cognitive disabilities or sensory disabilities or even communication disorders, especially those who are maybe having speech impairment. So you find that in order to break this barrier, we have to look for aspects which can enable us, whether it is issues around AI, artificial intelligence, whether it's issue about software or even hardware, which can enable these solutions to be found. And when you look on to that, you also try to look on how we can also bring that aspect of institutional barrier, whereby we have a lot of policies which are not inclusive within our government, or even within the private sectors, or even we don't have the data itself. We don't know the numbers of persons with abilities who have the skills which can be enable them in order to participate well within the community. So all this can be really part of the barriers which can be broken in terms of having inclusive policies, or even having data, disaggregated data, which can be able to enable us to plan much better, or even bringing more inclusive budgeting processes, whether when we are talking about ICT. What can be done in terms of change? The theory of change can be looked into this aspect of governments taking that mindfulness, or being aware of persons' abilities, and also trying to create that enabling environment to different stakeholders, whether it is having an ICT department or even a ministry, which can also have the aspects of ensuring that issues of persons' abilities are brought on board, in terms of whether it is regulation, whether it is in terms of policies, whether it is in terms of administrative measures. Because sometimes you find that, as our previous speakers have talked, life experiences are not really given thought of. And when you find that persons' abilities, when they're not greatly involved, there a lot of knowledge or a lot of skills are left out. And once you are able to bring that change in terms of effective engagement or public participation of persons' abilities, it can really enable us to ensure that we bring that thoughtfulness, or able to engage, so that they can be able to contribute, so that they can participate in co-designing, or in terms of co-creation or collaboration of different aspects of technology. And that one can really enable persons' abilities to become part of the social construct, which can be really enable persons' ability to become part of the solution. So at the end of the day, we look at this aspect in terms of creating that enabling environment, and bringing persons' abilities on board in the design, in the real concepts of whatever we are doing. So whether you're talking about research, whether we make persons' abilities to be part of a production point of it, not just consumers. So I look at that aspect of change in terms of making persons' abilities to be part of the story, not them be part of just the menu. Bring them where the cake is being baked. Nothing about us without us. So that should be our clarion call, so that we can enable everyone to become participant, and also create that enabling environment, whether we're talking in terms of policies, whether we're talking in terms of innovation, whether we're talking in terms of participation, whether we're not talking in terms of resource mobilization, so that we can enable all persons' abilities to be part of this story of ICT. As I conclude, I would like to thank the global platform, this one we are having, because I've seen also you have other platforms which other people come to educate us in terms of lectures, and there is a lot we can learn from this experience. So I'd like to stop there, maybe if we have some questions. Thank you very much. I hope I've spent the 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Paul. And what a wonderful way to conclude the webinar today. And I completely agree. And I think all of the panelists and the attendees will agree that we definitely want to be there when the cake is being baked, and not afterwards. And we want to be part of the story. So I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to the panelists and have had some really interesting points to continue thinking about. We have been able to answer a few of the questions in the chat, and I will, what I'll do is that I will post the questions and answers via email to all the attendees, so everyone should be able to read them. And hopefully we will see everyone again next week. So thank you everyone for joining, and yeah.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you to all the speakers. It's a great hour. Look forward to seeing the Q&A written up as well.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Bye.
See you
Thank
next
you.
week. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thanks, Paul.
Thank
Bye.
you.